Aloha. Welcome to the Triple F show with Eva Andrade, and I'm Jim Hochberg, the co-host. You know, there's been a lot of stuff going on nationally and in Hawaii here asking, should parents be involved in the teaching at school of their children? And we're going to talk about that on a broad but specific thing. So let's stay tuned and talk about it. So, hey, Eva, welcome to the show. I get to be the host today.
You get to be the host. And when we were off camera, you were already hassling me about this shirt, which he was saying is like a T-shirt. But you know what? I am bonding with our listeners at 94.9 KESU radio on Kauai and 1040 AM K-Light radio right here on Oahu, because there's regular people out there, Jim. Regular people that wear slippers and they get the local shirt and they want to relax, to you, brothers and sisters. Aloha.
Okay, so the bottom line on today's show, I'm going to give it to you at the beginning, I'm going to give it to you at the end. The people that are making these decisions about whether we get to be participating in the education of our kids in the public school system are mostly elected people. The Board of Education isn't. So voting is what we're going to get down to at the end, running for office and how to take control of this situation through the political process. But
I'm glad you're doing that, Jim, because on the last show, when we were talking about the assisted suicide bill, right, one of the things that we were lamenting is the fact that legislators keep putting out bad legislation, and then
Correct.
We have to live with what they do. So we're going to continue that conversation.
So in this particular session this year, there were two bills, both of which are dead, one of which stepsister is still alive. And the one bill had to do with whether parents are going to be allowed to participate in school-related functions without the fear of being arrested and charged with a crime that includes a penalty up to a year in prison and or up to $5,000 in fines if they impede the progress of the process. In other words, if we've seen it on television across the mainland, parents going to school board meetings where they actually get to elect their school board meetings. We don't here, but we could change that again. And they get angry because they're talking about their children. And this bill that the legislature passed through the whole House of Representatives, and it didn't get deferred until it hit the Senate, was going to say if somebody impedes the progress of whatever the meeting is dealing with school stuff, it was going to be a crime. That's bizarre, and we'll talk about that. And the other one was the legislature, through the House, passed over to the Senate another bill that was changing the school board's controversial issue policy with respect to sex stuff.
I know, and I really found it interesting when I was listening to your testimony, Jim, and I know you're going to get into that. It's, people, they see a law moving through the legislature and they think, okay, this is a problem that needs to be fixed, right? And everyone seems to think that the legislature should be allowed to fix every problem out there. But you called the attention to the legislators when you were testifying that, wait a second, you're in the wrong lane. And you were trying
it's not
to
your jurisdiction to change the Board of Education's controversial issues policy. So first of all, what we want to do today is talk to you about what are your actual rights. Why is it that you have the power to be involved in the education of your children? And why is it that the government does not supersede you?
And I want to jump in to say that even if you're not a parent, you still should know what the public schools are teaching, because you will be affected by it.
Well, and you're paying for it.
And you're paying for it.
So
yes.
First of all, when you want to go to a school meeting of some kind, school board meeting, parent-teacher conference, what you are actually doing is listening to what they're telling you is going on, and you're responding. And if you happen to have a grievance about what you're hearing, that's actually a First Amendment right to address your grievances with the government. And so you should never let anybody tell you that you're out of bounds. Of course, Nobody's supposed to punch anybody. Nobody's supposed to threaten to kill people. Those are all crimes.
And we have promised
those are already crimes.
We will do a show about that. So make sure you stay tuned to plug in, because we're going to talk about that. What's the right way to protest?
So the reason that you have that First Amendment right to address your government about things is because we own the government. You own the government. The government gets treated by too many of us. The example I like to use is you look out your front window and across the street you see your neighbor's house, and your neighbor has an old or a new vehicle in the carport or garage. That isn't the way you ought to look at your government. That car isn't your car. You don't put oil, gas, you don't drive it, you don't wash it, you don't trade it in and get a new one. It's not your car. But the government is your car. It's your government. And if you don't own it, it will own you. So that's the first point we want to make. We have to take control of what's going on. And for too long in Hawaii, because we're busy, it costs so much to live here, we got multiple jobs, we don't seem to have the time, but we need to prioritize
Well, and I
that.
think that what's happened especially over the past year, well, actually, let's go back a little further. It's actually because of the COVID lockdowns. A lot of parents suddenly became painfully aware what their kids were learning in school. And I can't tell you how many people were saying that as they were locked up with their kids and they're listening to what their kids are learning, parents started to go, wait. But even prior to that, I think that when you see the generation of kids that are being raised today and the way they treat people, the lack of courtesy, the disrespect, all of the stuff that's happening, we can say that parents have the first and foremost responsibility for the raising of their children. But I think some of this stuff is happening because parents have turned their back on what's being taught in the school.
And that's a good point, because part of my testimony at the Senate Education Committee was tolerance, which is what the school is asking for this law, criminalizing parental participation. Tolerance is a two-way street. If the school wants the parents to be tolerant, the school has to tolerate the parents, because they both have an interest in the process. And what's unfortunately been happening as an undercurrent that's now come to the surface for many, many years is the schools have been in different ways trying to get the parents not to be participating, because it's way easier to indoctrinate without parental involvement if they aren't on this team with you.
You know what? I got to say this because it's especially true in my life. And I know that there's going to be some listeners and viewers that are going to say this too. I was a single mom. I raised my two daughters by myself. And I will say that I was busy. I had two jobs I was working. And so when my daughters were going to school, one, luckily I was able to put in the private school system. The other one was the public school system. And I will tell you that I didn't have the time to check her homework and make sure she was doing everything. So I'm one of those parents that just kind of trusted that the school was going to do the right thing with my kid. Now, here's the difference, though. I did read the paperwork that she came home from. When she came home from school and we're going to get into a controversial subject, and we need your permission to either allow her to do it or to opt out. I did take that very, very seriously.
And since you brought up the T-shirt, if your children went to private school, you're totally posing as a common person.
I have both I have public school and private school, and I'm product of private school. So, I cannot say too many negative
So let's
things.
arm the viewers and listeners with some real facts that supports their desire under the First Amendment to advocate for their kids in the school system. And this comes out of President Bill Clinton's presidency. When he was a president in the 90s, the Department of Education at the federal level had Secretary of Education Riley, and he published a report. Interesting. The title of the report was Family Involvement in Children's Education. They studied it. And listen to this. No, seriously, listen to this. I'm going to read a couple of the bullet points that I pulled out of the report. And these are quotes. Schools get better when educators, families, and communities work together. How about that?
That's we get an amen
to bring to the school when they tell you that you're being a criminal, a domestic terrorist, as it were. Next one. If families are to partner with schools, the schools must provide parents with the opportunities and support they need for success. How about that? How about ammo?
I
This
will
is
give you
ammo.
another amen.
It requires sustained mutual collaboration and support of the school and the families. Schools must support families being active participants in their children's education. Schools must create a school environment that welcomes parents, encourages them to raise questions and voice their concerns, as well as to participate appropriately in decision making.
Mm-hmm.
One more. Schools must provide parents with the information they need to become involved, and schools must invite parents to participate in their children's learning. So if the Federal Department of Education Secretary studied and reported that this is how you get the best schools, then you and me and Eva, we need to be letting the legislature know this is the better plan. Making us criminals for doing this is not a good plan. Now, luckily, that bill is deferred and died in the Senate. But the other one, interestingly enough, is the sex ed one. When the Senate deferred and killed the bill, the House started moving a House concurrent resolution and a House resolution to go back to what the bill was going to do but couldn't do because the bill died, and do it as a resolution so that it will come back next year as another bill. And since I know you have strong feelings about this, I'm going to pass that to you.
I do, because I think that what bothers me the most about this is it seems like the bills we're looking at are really separating parent from child. They're really encouraging there to be a broken relationship with parents. And that really bothers me. You know, what they did is they took the bill that was deferred. Well, actually, no, 1697 was never heard. Senator Michelle Kidani
She never
heard the
died
bill.
without a hearing.
So it died without a hearing. But what happened was that the House introduced two resolutions, and basically there's a House resolution and there's a House concurrent resolution. And what resolutions are, they do not have the same impact as a
they
bill.
They don't have the force of law.
What they have is they show legislators' intent. They show what they'd like to see happen.
And when I disagree with them, I say it's pandering to the constituents that they couldn't serve.
Okay, yes, I know. If you want to know more about what Jim Hochberg really thinks, send him an email at jim@jameshochberglaw.com.
Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, this resolution they're doing this. Okay, so I've been in when I send out my alerts to people, and again, if you want to get them, make sure you sign up at hawaiifamilyforum.org. But when I send out my alerts, what I'm saying about this resolution is this is our government allowing the kids to do the dirty work. Because
Correct.
That's what this is.
Well, I mean, if I ran a public school system, why wouldn't I just ask the high school kids how to do it? It's stupid.
Okay, and let's think about how this came to be. It came to be according to HB 1675. It came to be because there was a youth summit
in 2021.
And the youth came out and said, we need to have this type of sex ed. And they were very specific about the sex ed they felt they needed. Now, my question to legislators as I was working the building was, okay, so how many kids went to this summit? First of all, can we get a copy of the report?
They won't give a report.
And so we can't even see this so-called report. Then we ask, okay, now what is the representation of these kids? Because apparently you get an invite. Now they do open.
The student gets an invite from the teacher. The student
gets an invite from the teacher to go to this summit. Now I did go and look, and there is a website, a youth summit website, where the kids can go sign up. So it's not like they're saying, you can't come, but we know that teachers and there's a youth network that likes to testify.
It's the Hawaii Youth Services Network, which goes way back to the teen line in the late 80s.
Right. But so they made it clear that they want to promote kids to go to this. So my question is it a true representation of what the kids want? That's my first question. My second question is, can I see what they're asking for? So anyway, the bill ended up not being heard. So what they did is they turned it into a resolution. And what the resolution says, and this is House Resolution 138 and House Concurrent Resolution 138, it says, requesting the Department of Education to create a student-led working group to address the need for active inclusion of diverse identities within and beyond sexual health education, to teach culturally responsive ideas around mutual respect in relationships, and to find sites of potential active inclusion of these identities in sexual health curricula, all within the framing principles of aloha kekahi e kekahi. And what's bothersome to me is, just like with Pono Choices, that they take these Hawaiian terms and they make it into something that is distasteful for most parents. But my biggest problem with this is they are going to have a student-led working group who is going to work with the Hawaii Youth Services Network, probably Planned Parenthood, and they're going to come up with what they say they need. Now, my issue that I take with that is, if I go by their numbers and they say 10% of the kids here in the state of Hawaii have gender identity issues, whether they're LGBTQ, whatever, right? 10%. Does the other 90% need to learn how to have gay sex?
Well, I would think that the Youth Services Network says yes, so that they don't make them feel bad.
Well, okay, if they want it though, why can't it be an opt-in? If 10% of these kids want this extra
It could be an
curriculum
opt-in,
stuff,
and that's a good idea.
make it an opt-in so that it's like, okay, look, you're saying you need this, but the other 90% do not need to know this. Now, health stuff, I guess, is important, that kids get accurate health information. I'm not opposed to that, but I'm strongly opposed to the politics that are attached to this issue every single time it's brought up.
So when the school does this kind of stuff, it bothers me, because almost 100 years ago, in 1925, and if you put that in the context of history, that was when the Russian Revolution was going on, communism was starting to come out, progressivism had started, euthanasia, eugenics was a big thing. So if you go all the way back there was a unanimous decision of the United States Supreme Court in 1925, Pierce versus Society of Sisters. It had to do with the parents' right to decide what their kids were going to be educated in the public school system. And it's interesting because the language of the case includes this: the fundamental theory of liberty that in America we live under. The fundamental theory of liberty excludes any general power of the state to standardize children. Think about that. Unanimous opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court said the government doesn't have the power to standardize children. They went on to say the child is not a mere creature of the state, and parents have the right, coupled with the quote-unquote high duty, to raise their children to regulate the moral and educational upbringing of the kid. So that's been around for almost 100 years. And in the meantime, there have been this. I went to public schools here in the 1971 to 1975. The sex ed back then was kind of crazy. Nothing like it is now. But a lot of parents were not too keen on the public schools in Hawaii teaching sex ed. Back then, the parents were going to do it, but the talk was, well, so many parents don't that we have to tell the kids because they're going to get pregnant. That was the whole thing back in those days. Now it is so incredibly more. It's crazy.
I know I'm going to date myself, but when I had sex ed in grade school, they talked about a lot of the health issues that come with it. Like, again, if you have sex and you get pregnant, here's what happens. Here's how you make a baby.
They didn't tell you
that kind
what
of stuff.
to do.
Yeah, there was no instruction. Like they didn't say, here's how you have good sex. But what happened again is that Hawaii legalized. I know it's like this. We should have done a disclaimer at the beginning of this show again. But I think that the danger with this is knowing that Planned Parenthood has had our kids in Hawaii since 1971 when we legalized abortion.
Correct.
And when
you say they've had our kids, what do you mean?
I mean that they've been allowed to educate and train our kids, and a lot of the schools have partnered with them. They go in without any issue. They go into the public schools. When they purchased their $8.2 million building in the middle of heart of downtown, what was
next to the police station on Baratania.
Yeah, when they did that, one of their goals was to provide more education in the community. So, I mean, would that we could have millions of dollars, poured into us to do some kind of real health abstinence training. And they made fun of abstinence training. I mean, this was something in the HB 1697. They made it clear abstinence doesn't work. It's ridiculous. Why are we teaching this? But
it actually is the only thing that does work.
If somebody abstains from sex,
they
will
get
not
diseases,
get diseases. They will not get pregnant. And they won't have the pressure that comes from once you say yes to sex. And I mean, come on, let's be honest about this, right? If a teenager gives themselves to their partner at a young age, they very rarely will say, gee, you know what? That probably was a bad thing. I probably won't do this again. I mean, maybe there are. And I want to give a shout out to those that are like, okay, I probably shouldn't have done that. And then they wait. But the point is that the message that Planned Parenthood has been telling our kids is you can't say no. And because you can't
You're an
say
animal is why you can't say no.
We need to provide.
But what they say.
But I take issue with that. You know what? Teenagers can say
do.
no. And they should say no. And it's okay to say no.
And that's why the parent should be involved in the education, because the parents are way more likely to tell the child to say no.
Actually,
because the parents have to deal with the fallout.
That's not true. I'm going to be honest about this. I was doing a youth talk recently and was sharing some of these thoughts that were going on. And I had a couple of parents that came up to me after and they were like, I can't tell my kid not to have sex because they know I was promiscuous. And so I think what's happening
But that's really bad parenting.
No, it's
because
not.
you can admit your own failures and lead your children.
Well, yes, that's true. But I mean, the point is that unfortunately, after the 1960s, a lot of people were having sex outside of marriage. And I think that there are parents who feel like, wow, am I hypocritical to tell my kid? And
it's good to be hypocritical on those kinds of issues.
I wouldn't call it hypocritical. What I say to parents is be honest. Your kids want you to say, you know what? I struggled with this and I failed. And here's how I fixed it, right? Obviously, there may be some crazy parents that are still promiscuous today, but I don't think so. I would wager that a lot of these parents have learned from their mistakes. And be honest with your kids.
Yeah.
I mean, kids today are not going to listen, to the person up there going, it's time to be chaste, and because they're going to be like, yeah, good for you. I lost my chasteness at 12, now it doesn't.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Now, I wasn't speaking about me generally, their son. But okay, I got to do this so I don't get the nasty emails. I am not telling, especially churches, not to promote chastity.
Correct.
Because they should be. And that is because that is something that should be treasured. So I promote that strongly. I'm just saying that sometimes we got to look at what we're dealing with reality wise before we can start making a difference. And I think parents just need to be honest. So let's go back to their responsibility.
So in Hawaii, we have a tragic, in my view, school board, because in 2018 or 2008, when did we change the Constitution to not elect our school board members?
That was
2008.
It was pretty recent, yeah.
Or no, it wasn't a con, so it was just the legislature gave us the constitutional amendment. But the thing is, you really have to keep your eyes on the Hawaii Board of Education, because although their own policies have this controversial issue policy with an opt-out when a teacher is going to teach something that's controversial,
2210 and 2245, if somebody wants to look it up.
But the Department of Education supported this bill, both bills, the sex ed bill, which would have been completely contrary to the controversial issues policy, and the criminalization of parents bill.
Now, tell people what the controversial policy is, because they may not know.
So basically, if the teacher believes that something the teacher wants to present in the classroom is controversial, which I guess would mean people disagree on the impact of it or the truth of it or the value of it, the teacher has to meet with the principal. The principal and the teacher send a letter home to the parents saying, on this day, we're going to teach this thing. and you can opt your student out. If you opt your student out, we have to give them replacement instruction and no penalty comes to them. And then there's an opt-out that the parent can take advantage of. So,
but you have a problem with the way that's written.
Assuming that the teacher does it and the principal does it, and assuming the child gives the letter to the parent has to read the letter and the parent has to make a decision and opt the student out. But that's not really the point. The point is we don't elect the school board members in Hawaii. There's one school board for the entire state. So we have to watch their meetings, because they're supporting legislation to change their policies without changing their policy. So all of a sudden, when the legislation passes, they can just say, oh, well, the legislature said, right? So that gets us down to how do we protect ourselves from this chess game? And that is through electing the right people who share our values. And too often we vote for what reason?
We vote because we're related to somebody, or because it's my broadest friend's cousin's niece's broadest friend that went to Kamehameha schools with me.
Yeah. Instead of saying, you want me to vote for you, Mr. or Miss Candidate, what do you stand for on these issues that are important to me? I want to vote for candidates that I agree with on the values issues, and I need to know that information. So we haven't had that kind of election process, even though you do, HFF does a wonderful job with the voter guide stuff.
No, I wasn't going to even say the voter guide. What I'm saying is let's be
real. There are some good legislators. That's true.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say when it comes to voting, the real issue is that people have to choose. And I make a joke of this, but it's true. People have to pick between Satan and the Antichrist.
Well, and sometimes
that's who's on the ballot.
Sometimes
they're like,
that's true.
So it goes back to voting. I agree with you.
But I want to get to the thing we're doing April 28th.
That's a great, because it does tie in.
Exactly.
And the point is that we need good people to run for office.
Exactly.
That's
so
what
Hawaii Family Forum, which is Eva, Hawaii Family Advocates, which I run, we're jointly teaching a seminar at One Love Ministries, which is at 670 Awahi Street in Kaka'ako. If you eat at Highway Inn or Moku's, it's just Mauka, the next little shopping center.
And it's really exciting because we're calling it the Ministry of Public Policy. So what we're doing is we're showing why Jesus has called us to be involved in the political realm, and it could mean being a candidate.
So what we're doing, what we want is everybody that knows somebody, which means everybody, every one of us, should consider making this time available in person at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 28th in Kaka'ako. It's going to be live streamed. If you can't come in person, that opportunity is there. The reason everybody should participate is we're going to talk about how do you identify a good candidate. Who would be a good candidate to run for office? Part of it is scriptural, part of it's practical. We're going to talk about what are the requirements to run for office. Maybe you know somebody when you hear this information and you'll go and talk to them and say, hey, you know what? You would be a good candidate. And they may never have thought about it. And they may decide to run.
And here's what we will not be doing. We will not be endorsing or supporting any candidate for political.
Of course not. But in the
last
minute, we got to get to the other parts of what the program is going to be. So we're going to talk about how to identify good candidates. What does a person have to do to become a candidate? How can people that want to support that candidate, what do they do? And then my wife, Janet, who ran for the House of Representatives in 2014, is going to actually share her experience. What was it like for her? So that's what we want to do. April 28th, Thursday evening, 6:30. You're going to get an invite from Eva on Hawaii Family Forum. You'll get one from me, Hawaii Family Advocates. You can ask in the show here if you write in a question. But that's our show for today, and that's what we want to get to. We need to take control of what our kids are taught.
Yep, and in this last seconds, if you want to see this show continue on YouTube, then we're looking for sponsors right now. So give me a call at info@hawaiifamilyforum.org or jim@jameshochbergerlaw.com and ask how you can keep this show on the air. So aloha, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching.